Jacob Reeve stood guard outside the southern gate of Outpost Vega, staring into the distant purple sky where three suns overlapped. The ground beneath his boots was cracked and dry. It had been peaceful for weeks, maybe too peaceful. He didn't trust peace anymore. The scanners began to blink red. A humming sound filled the air. He looked up and saw them giant alien cruisers breaking through the clouds like shadows with teeth. They didn't open fire, not yet. They simply hovered like predators waiting for the moment to strike. Soldiers ran to position. Sirens screamed. Anti-air guns rotated and locked on targets. But still, the alien fleet held formation. Not a single missile, not a single shot. The tension in the air was thicker than smoke. No one knew what was about to happen. Then a single pod detached from the mothership and fell to the desert floor. Outside the base, Jacob was one of the first to respond. His boots kicked up dust as he rushed toward the landing site with his rifle drawn. The others followed, silent and ready. The pod opened slowly. White mist poured out, followed by a figure dressed in royal armor, an alien woman with violet skin, golden eyes, and a voice that cut through the noise. She didn't raise a weapon. She didn't ask permission. She simply spoke one sentence. "I come under command of Her Majesty, Queen Virella of the Obari Empire. I request audience with your leaders immediately." Jacob lowered his weapon but didn't relax. The name Obari sent chills down his spine. The Obari Empire had never negotiated before. They conquered. They ruled. If one of them was asking for an audience, something was very wrong. The base commander, General Matthews, agreed to the meeting under full security. The alien envoy named Lena walked through the base with grace and calm, unfazed by the stares and the weapons pointed her way. Jacob was ordered to remain close at all times. Inside the war room, Lena presented a glowing crystal. It showed holographic images of an approaching force not even her people could stop. A hive species known as the Drexer was devouring planets, starting with ones the Obari couldn't defend. Earth was next. The Queen offered a deal. Not surrender, not alliance, but sanctuary. One human male would be chosen to live with her daughter in the Obari capital. An act of symbolic unity to calm growing unrest among both their populations. That human was Jacob. He didn't understand why. He wasn't a diplomat or a hero. Just a quiet soldier with average scores and no family back home. The Queen had personally requested him, and no one could explain it. Orders came in within the hour. He was to leave immediately. The shuttle that picked him up was sleek and silent. Inside, the walls shimmered with blue light. The air smelled like wildflowers and metal. He sat across from Lena, who said little during the flight. She simply observed him with eyes that never blinked. They arrived at the Obari capital just as the twin moons rose. The city was alive with towers of light and floating gardens. The people stared at him but didn't speak. He wasn't sure if it was curiosity or judgment, maybe both. He tried not to stare back. At the heart of the palace stood Queen Virella. Her presence filled the chamber. She was tall, regal, and beautiful, with silver hair that moved like silk in the breeze. She didn't smile, but her gaze held no hostility. Only a strange, calm intensity. "I have chosen you, Jacob Reeve," she said. "You will live with my daughter and teach her your ways. You will learn hers. And when the Drexer come, the two of you will be the reason this galaxy still has hope." Before he could speak, another figure stepped forward. The Queen's daughter. She looked even younger than he expected, but her golden armor glowed with status. Her expression was unreadable. Her eyes narrowed as she sized him up like a puzzle. Jacob didn't know what to say. He had come expecting war, maybe death, not royal orders, not alien palaces, and certainly not a girl with violet skin, sharp wit, and the power to change the future with a single word. The girl stepped closer. Her voice was cool and sharp. "So you're the one my mother chose. Let's see if you're as useful as she thinks." Jacob didn't move. He kept his eyes on hers. This was not a mission anymore. It was something else entirely. And whatever it was, he wasn't ready for it. Jacob followed the princess through the palace halls, unsure whether he was a guest, a prisoner, or something in between. The Obari walls shimmered with light, constantly changing patterns, as if the building itself breathed. His boots echoed softly on smooth violet floors as alien guards watched him silently. The princess didn't look back as she walked ahead. Her name was Solari, though she hadn't offered it. A royal attendant had spoken it during a formal introduction. She hadn't smiled once. Her voice was calm but held a sharp edge like a blade hidden in silk. At last, they entered a chamber large, round, and open to the stars above. A canopy of woven crystal glowed faintly with the light of twin moons. Solari turned and faced him without emotion. "You will sleep here. My quarters are across the bridge. Do not enter them unless invited." Jacob nodded, keeping his response short. Understood. He dropped his gear beside the bed, which looked more like an art sculpture than furniture. It was shaped like a crescent, covered in glowing cloth that shifted color with his touch. He sat down slowly, wondering if it was safe to sleep in such an alien place. Before he could get comfortable, a new voice startled him. "You don't belong here, human." He looked up and saw another Obari female, standing beside Solari with narrowed eyes and silver-plated armor. She looked like a warrior, not a servant. Her body posture was aggressive. She stepped forward slowly as if daring him to react. "This is Velsha," Solari said. "My guardian. She believes you are unworthy. Prove her wrong or stay out of her way." Jacob didn't rise to the bait. He had been in worse situations. He gave a small nod to Velsha, then looked at Solari. "What exactly am I supposed to teach you?" Solari's eyes narrowed, but her voice was still calm. "Your kind builds strength from chaos. We don't understand that. We are taught control, logic, and power. But your people resist, adapt, and survive. My mother believes I must learn that skill." Jacob leaned forward slightly. "And what am I supposed to learn from you?" Solari paused, then spoke firmly. "Discipline, vision, and how not to die for pointless things." There was a long silence between them. Then she turned and left the room without another word. Velsha stayed. A moment longer, her glare burning into him. Then she followed the princess into the shadows of the hall. Jacob lay back and stared up at the crystal ceiling. He didn't feel like a teacher or a student. He felt like a pawn on a board he couldn't see, but there was no going back. He had to find a way to make this work, or die trying. The next morning, his training began. Or rather, hers did. They started in the palace garden, a strange floating ring of soil and plants suspended in the air by humming blue energy. The trees glowed with soft pink light, and birds with crystal wings darted overhead. Jacob was given a simple task. Teach Solari how to build a fire without any tech. She stared at the dry sticks and looked insulted. "This is primitive." "Exactly," he replied. "And when your palace power fails and your weapons don't work, you'll be glad you know it." She watched as he struck the flint and steel together. Sparks flew. Slowly, the fire took shape. She crouched beside him, her violet fingers steady and precise, but her expression showed something new. Curiosity. Later that day, he was thrown into her world. He was placed inside a giant white chamber, filled with energy fields and tests of mental clarity. The Obari taught through force and failure. Each mistake triggered a feedback pulse that made him stagger. But he kept going. Solari watched him closely as he struggled. She didn't mock him. She didn't help either. But her gaze had changed. Less cold, more thoughtful. At dinner, they sat together in silence while the queen observed from above. The room was filled with nobles and generals. Jacob noticed how many eyes watched him with quiet suspicion. He was not welcomed here. But he was not ignored either. The queen finally spoke. "What have you learned today, Jacob Reeve?" He stood and answered calmly. "Your daughter is sharper than most soldiers I've met, but she doesn't understand failure. I think that's what scares her the most." There was a brief silence. Then Queen Varela nodded slightly. That was all. But it felt like passing. Some unspoken test. As the meal ended, Solari rose beside him. She said nothing, but her hand brushed his for a moment as they walked. Not by accident. Not by chance. It was a signal, small, subtle, but not meaningless. Jacob understood one thing now. He wasn't just living in the palace. He was being studied, challenged, and maybe even trusted. But trust among the Obari came with conditions. Dangerous ones. And tomorrow, those conditions would begin to unfold. The third day began with a summons to the Obari council chamber. Jacob stood before 12 robed figures, each seated on a platform that hovered above the floor. Their faces were painted with gold and black symbols. None of them smiled. None of them looked friendly. The queen's voice echoed through the chamber. "Jacob Reeve, today you will take the first trial. Refusal is not an option." He didn't ask what the trial was. Questions were seen as weakness here. Instead, he stood still, waiting. A panel opened in the floor and rose with a metal sphere hovering above it. Lights pulsed across its surface. The guard stepped back as it activated. "You must face the Logic Sentinel," one of the counselors said. "If it finds you unworthy, you will be removed from the palace." Permanently. Jacob nodded once and stepped forward. The sphere floated higher, spinning slowly, then released a bright pulse that enveloped the chamber. Suddenly, he stood alone in a strange illusion. A simulated desert stretched out in all directions. No sky, no stars, just endless sand. A voice rang in his head. "Survive until the sun rises." There was no sun, just darkness and cold. Then came the sound, metal scraping, growing louder. He turned and saw machines rising from the sand. Obari drones, but with red lights instead of blue. Hostile simulations, 1, then 3, then 6. He ran at the first one, dodging a laser burst and slamming his fist into its center. Pain shot through his knuckles, but the drone fell. He grabbed its metal limb and used it like a club against the others. His breath came fast, his heart pounding. Time meant nothing in that place. Hours or minutes, he didn't know. He fought until his arms ached and his legs shook. Finally, the sky above changed. A fake sun rose, casting gold across the sand. The drones vanished. The trial ended. Jacob dropped to his knees, soaked in sweat and bruises. When the illusion faded, he was back in the chamber. The council watched him in silence. Then one of them gave a small nod. The queen stood and spoke again. "You are still alive. That is enough for now." As he was let out, he saw Solari waiting. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes lingered on the bruises forming across his face and arms. She didn't speak until they were alone in the corridor. "You were not expected to pass." He raised an eyebrow. "Did you want me to fail?" "No," she replied. "But I did not think you would fight with your bare hands against machines." He shrugged. "Wasn't my first time." Later that evening, she brought him to a hidden chamber beneath the palace. Inside was a library filled with glowing cubes and rotating data prisms. She touched one, and a three-dimensional battlefield appeared above. "The floor. This is where I study war," she said. "Our wars are elegant, planned, controlled, but your people wage chaos like it is an art. I want to understand that." He stepped closer, watching a simulation of human soldiers in trench warfare. "We don't enjoy it. We just refuse to die quietly." She looked at him, then deactivated the display. "There is something different about you, Jacob. The Queen sees it." "I see it, but I still don't trust it. That makes two of us," he replied without hesitation. Over the next few days, the training changed. They trained together in the open garden arena. Solari was fast, focused, and graceful. Jacob was rough, strong, and unpredictable. She used strategy. He used instinct. They clashed like fire and wind. One day, while sparring, he knocked her, weapon aside, and caught her arm. She didn't pull away. Instead, she looked up at him with narrowed eyes. "Why do you hold back?" He let go and stepped back. "Because I'm not here to hurt you. That's your weakness," she said. Coldly, "No," he replied. "That's what makes me human." That night, Jacob received a message crystal from the Queen. Inside was a direct command. "The Drexer have reached the border system. They will be here within weeks. You and my daughter must be ready. If you fail, Earth falls first." He stared at the glowing message, heart pounding. The galaxy's survival was somehow tied to a soldier and a princess who barely understood each other. It made no sense. And yet, here he was, caught in the center of it all. Solari entered without knocking. She had seen the same message. "Then we don't have much time," he nodded. "Then let's stop pretending we hate each other." She tilted her head, surprised. But she didn't disagree. Outside, the stars began to shift. The Drexer were coming. And the Palace of Light was preparing for war. For the next 6 days, Jacob and Solari trained from dawn until nightfall. They trained in weapons, in hand-to-hand combat, in diplomacy simulations, and in survival drills across harsh terrains, built by Obari technology. Each day left them bruised, sore, and silent. But they were no longer strangers. They moved like a pair now. She read his movements. He understood her timing. They fought, argued, and pushed one another harder than any commander ever had. The Obari watched from afar, whispering behind crystalline doors. Some began to bow slightly as Jacob passed. Respect did not come easily here. On the 7th day, the Queen summoned them both. She stood at the top of a white marble staircase, wearing full royal armor laced with crimson gems. Her expression was unreadable. She didn't greet them with kindness or formality. Her words were direct and cold. "It is time you left the palace. The Drexer will not wait, and you must prove your worth beyond these walls." Jacob exchanged a glance with Solari. Neither asked where they were going. That would be answered soon enough. They boarded a black skimmer that flew low across the surface of Obari Prime, past cities of floating glass, past fields of energy storms. Finally, the skimmer descended into a canyon wrapped in darkness. A hidden military station was carved deep into the cliffs. The commander of the outpost, General Othrex, greeted them with a single nod. His 4 eyes examined Jacob with open skepticism. "So this is the Queen's choice." Jacob stood still, not reacting. "Follow me," Othrex said. "Your first task is to enter the silent sector. No weapons. No communication. If you return alive, we'll talk again." Jacob frowned. "Alone?" "No," Othrex replied. "With her." Solari didn't flinch. She stepped beside Jacob and nodded once. They were handed packs with limited supplies. No armor, no protection. Just each other. They entered the silent sector as the gate behind them slammed shut. The air grew colder. The ground crunched under their boots. No sound passed through. Even their breathing felt muffled. The silence was so complete it was painful. They moved cautiously, their footsteps slow and light. Strange glowing vines reached from the walls. Small creatures with needle legs watched them from above. Time passed in endless quiet. Then came the movement. A large creature with 6 legs and skin like molten rock leapt from the shadows. Jacob reacted first, tackling Solari out of the way. They hit the ground hard as the beast roared silently. No sound came from its mouth. Only the tremble of the earth gave it away. Jacob drew a sharpened rod from his belt and swung. The beast's side cracked, spraying dark fluid across the rocks. Solari stabbed upward with a shard she had grabbed from the ground. Together, they fought in silence, surrounded by a world without noise. The creature fell. They breathed heavily, exhausted and bleeding. Their eyes met again in that mute world. Jacob held her hand longer than he needed to. She didn't pull away. When they finally reached the edge of the sector, the gate opened. Sound rushed back like wind. The soldiers on the other side were shocked to see them, alive. And together, General Ofrix gave a slow, deliberate nod. Maybe. The Queen wasn't wrong. That night, the two sat near the fire at the edge of the outpost. No palace, no titles. Just two fighters resting under unfamiliar stars. You didn't hesitate. Solari said softly. Neither did you, Jacob. Replied. She looked into the flames. My people don't value emotion. They believe it weakens us. But lately, I wonder if that belief is what makes us fragile. Jacob poked at the fire with a stick. Emotion isn't weakness. It's the reason we fight. The reason we keep standing. She nodded slowly. You have changed since arriving. So have you, he said. They sat quietly. Then, without thinking, she rested her head on his shoulder. He didn't move. The fire cracked gently, warming them both in the dark. Far above, the Drexer ships moved closer through deep space. The countdown had begun. The Queen stood in her private chamber, watching the stars through a massive window. Her advisors spoke behind her, their words filled with fear and worry. She said nothing. Her gaze remained locked on one corner of the sky, the sector where her daughter now slept beside a human. Let them become more than symbols, she whispered to herself. Let them become the spark. Jacob woke before the sun rose over the canyon. His body was sore, his side bruised from the last fight. Solari was already up, standing on a ledge with her arms crossed. She wore her training armor again, the silver threads glowing faintly. Under the dawn light, he stepped beside her without speaking. The silence between them was no longer cold. It had become something strong. A quiet understanding neither of them needed to explain. Another mission today, she said, eyes scanning the cliffs below. General Ofrix said we're joining. A real patrol this time, no simulations. No safety, Jacob nodded. Good, I'm tired of playing games. They descended into the base where the Abari patrol waited. 10 soldiers in full battle gear. None of them smiled at the sight of Jacob, but none of them challenged him either. He had earned something close to their respect. Their ship was fast and narrow, built for speed over armor. It sliced through the sky like a blade. Below them, the surface of Obari Prime shifted from desert to jungle to glass plains. The destination was a ruined station that had gone silent 3 days ago. The Drexer had been spotted nearby when they landed. The station looked dead. Doors twisted open. Lights flickered. Smoke leaked from vents. The squad moved cautiously. Jacob stayed near Solari, watching every corner. His instincts screamed this was a trap. Inside, they found no bodies. Just blood, trails of it, claw marks on the walls. Deep ones. Then came the signal. A high-pitched wail from the motion sensors. Movement. Fast. Multiple directions. The Drexer struck from the shadows. Insect-like with armored limbs and razor jaws. The squad opened fire as chaos exploded in the hall. Jacob grabbed Solari's arm and pulled her back behind a collapsed bulkhead. She tossed him a plasma blade. We fight together, he grinned, despite the fear rising in his chest. Always, they moved through the broken station side by side, cutting through the Drexer swarm. Jacob's blade hummed as it clashed with chitin. Solari spun with perfect precision, her strikes clean and fast. The two moved like they were born for it. One of the Obari soldiers fell. Then another. The swarm was growing. They had to retreat. Jacob shouted for the others to fall back toward the ship. Solari covered them, her armor cracked but her stance firm. As they reached the exit, one of the Drexer leapt at Jacob from above. Solari didn't hesitate. She threw herself between them, taking the blow. The impact knocked her to the floor, and blood spilled across the metal. Jacob screamed and sliced the beast apart. Then he dropped to her side and lifted her in his arms. Her eyes stayed open, but her breath was shallow. "You're not dying today," he growled. The squad rallied around him, covering their retreat. They barely made it back to the ship. As the doors sealed, Jacob pressed a stasis patch to Solari's wound. The medics rushed in, but he didn't let go of her hand. She looked up at him and whispered something only he could hear. "You are mine now, you don't get to run." The flight back was silent. No one questioned the moment. No one mocked the way Jacob sat with her in the medbay, refusing to move even as blood covered his own uniform. When they returned to the palace, the queen was waiting. Her face showed no emotion, but her eyes scanned her daughter first, then Jacob, then back again. She spoke softly, but her voice echoed like thunder in the hall. "You have gone beyond the role I gave you." Jacob stood straight. "I followed orders." "No," the queen said. "You chose her life over your own. That is not an order. That is something older, deeper." The queen dismissed the guards and stepped forward, alone. "Tell me, Jacob Reeve, if the time came and you had to choose between saving Earth or saving my daughter, what would you do?" Jacob didn't blink. "I would find a way to save both. That's what humans do." The queen's expression changed just slightly. A flicker of something. Then she turned and walked away. Later that night, Solari woke in her chamber. Jacob was seated nearby, head resting against the wall, eyes barely open. When he saw her move, he stood and approached. "You stayed," she said. "Of course," he replied. She touched his hand gently. "You're not like them. You don't follow their rules. That makes you dangerous. And yet, you still trust." "Me, I trust what we became," she said. They stood together in the quiet chamber. No more tests, no more pretending. Just two souls caught in a war that neither of them chose. But somehow now, it felt like they were exactly where they were meant to be. Jacob stood on the balcony overlooking the Obari capital. The city shimmered. Under the night sky, lights dancing across floating towers. Below, the streets were quiet. But he could feel the weight of something heavy approaching. Something no light could distract from. Behind him, Solari stepped into the open, her robes soft and silver, her movements slower than before. Though healed, the injury had changed her. Not just physically, her eyes were sharper. Her words, when she spoke, carried more fire. The queen summoned the high command. "She wants us in the war hall tomorrow." "There's no hiding now," Jacob nodded without turning. "The Drexer are close, aren't they?" "Yes," she said. "We have less than 4 days before they reach the outer defense wall." He turned to face her, arms crossed. "And you think your people are ready?" "No," she replied honestly. "But we have no other choice. They entered the war hall together." The queen stood in the center, surrounded by generals, tacticians, and Obari nobles. She raised her hand and the room fell silent. A star map appeared in the air, showing red markers moving across space like bloodstains. The code Endo. "Drexer have already taken 3 colonies," the queen announced. "They will be here before the moons shift again. We will not meet them alone." Whispers broke out. Jacob waited for the moment. He knew what was coming. And it came when the queen turned her eyes to him. "This human," she said, "will lead the vanguard alongside my daughter. Their team will strike at the Drexer command ship. It is the only way to stall their advance." The room exploded with protests. "He is not one of us. This is madness. You're risking our future on an outsider." The queen raised her hand again. He has bled for us. He has saved her life. He has faced what none of you dared. He is not one of you. That is why he must lead. Jacob didn't react to the shouts. He only looked at Solari, and she nodded once. They were both thinking the same thing. This mission wasn't about glory. It was about survival. The next day, they boarded a stealth class cruiser with a team of elite Obari warriors. Velsha was among them. She still didn't like Jacob, but she no longer questioned his place beside the princess. As they slipped into the dark edge of Drexer space, the stars outside faded. The closer they came to the enemy fleet, the colder the air became. The crew spoke less. No one wanted to jinx the silence. The Drexer command ship appeared ahead like a black mountain floating in the void. Massive, alive with green veins of energy pulsing through its shell. Thousands of fighters swarmed around it like insects protecting a hive, ready to drop. Velsha said. Solari checked her blade. Jacob locked his rifle to his back. Let's end this. They launched into space inside sealed pods. The cold gripped them instantly. But their target was clear. The side hatch of the Drexer vessel opened, and they crashed through, rolling into its dark belly. Inside, the air was thick and wet. The walls pulsed like muscle. Lights flickered. The Drexer had no concept of beauty, only function. Every hallway smelled of acid and rot. Jacob moved first, clearing corners. Solari followed with sharp focus. The team pressed inward. One soldier was taken by a spike trap. Another was dragged screaming into a sealing hatch. They pressed on, no time to grieve. No time to hesitate. Finally, they reached the core. A massive green heart, beating within a cage of bone and steel. The Drexer commander waited there. Tall, twisted, covered in armor that looked grown, not built. You will fall, the creature hissed. Not today, Jacob replied. They charged together. Solari moved left, distracting the creature while Jacob rolled under its sweeping claws. He fired at the core behind it, forcing the beast to turn. Velsha leapt from above, striking its back. The battle shook the chamber. In the end, it was Solari's blade that pierced the core. The creature screamed and collapsed, its body turning to ash as the walls began to collapse. The core pulsed violently. The ship was dying. Time to go. Jacob shouted. They ran through collapsing corridors, fire erupting behind them. The escape pods launched just as the Drexer command ship exploded into light. From orbit, the Obari fleet watched in stunned silence. The queen stood before the viewing window, her hand clenched tightly. When the signal came through, target destroyed, she closed her eyes and whispered one word. Good. Back on. The cruiser, Jacob removed his helmet. His face was bruised, burned, but alive. Solari sat beside him, her head resting on his shoulder again. This time, he leaned into her gently. Now they believe, she whispered. He nodded. Let them. We've earned it. Outside the ship, the Drexer fleet began to scatter. For the first time, they ran. The return to Obari Prime was nothing like the silence of their departure. As their cruiser entered the atmosphere, lights filled the sky. Civilian crafts floated beside them in formation. Towers pulsed with ceremonial colors. The city below moved as if breathing in celebration. Jacob watched from the window, arms folded. He still wore his scorched uniform. The wounds on his arms were raw, but healing. He hadn't spoken much since the Drexer command ship fell. It wasn't victory he carried in his chest. It was something heavier. Solari stood beside him in full ceremonial armor. Her wounds had been treated, but her posture was not that of a princess returning home. She stood like a soldier who had seen too much and knew more was coming. The queen stood waiting at the central landing ring, flanked by her elite guards. Obari citizens lined the upper levels, watching in silence. When the ship touched down, the crowd did not cheer. Instead, they bowed. As one, Jacob stepped down first. Solari followed. They walked side by side until they reached the Queen. Jacob lowered his eyes out of habit. But the Queen spoke before he could kneel. "You will not bow, Jacob Reeve. You do not serve beneath us. You now stand among us." He looked up, unsure how to respond. The Queen turned her gaze to her daughter. "You have done more than was asked. You fought beside a human. You bled beside him. And now you have returned with something this empire has not known in centuries. Hope." The crowd erupted in sound. A roar that shook the air. Jacob stood frozen as hands reached out from the crowd, touching his arms, his shoulders. Some even whispered his name. Solari stepped closer and leaned toward him. "Careful. They might start building statues." He gave a small smile. "Let's hope they don't ask me to pose." Later that evening, the palace hosted a formal gathering. Nobles, commanders, and envoys from allied systems filled the hall. Music played softly. Crystals shimmered above the ceiling like stars caught in motion. Jacob remained near the edge of the crowd. He wasn't used to attention. Every drink offered to him came with a bow. Every conversation ended with a thank you. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like someone who had barely made it through. Solari approached him with 2 glasses. "Obari firefruit wine. Don't ask what's in it." He took one and raised it slightly. To surviving the impossible, they drank. For a moment, they didn't speak. The room around them faded into background noise. He looked at her and saw something different now. Not just strength, not just beauty, but connection. "You never told me why your mother chose me," he said quietly. Solari looked away, then back into his eyes. "She didn't," Jacob froze. "What? I did," Solari said. "When the Queen asked for a human to be sent, I read the records. I chose you. Not because you were the best, but because you were the most human. The one who never gave up, even when it made no sense." He blinked, surprised. "So this whole thing, from the start?" She nodded slowly. "I needed someone who didn't believe in perfection. I needed someone who would challenge me, even when I hated it, and you did. Every single day." Jacob didn't know what to say. Solari stepped closer. Her voice lowered, almost a whisper. "I didn't expect to care what happened to you. But now, I don't want to imagine what happens if I lose you." He placed his hand over hers. The room didn't matter. The celebration faded. The war, for the moment, was quiet. In that small space between words, something changed between them. Suddenly, an alert sounded. Red lights flashed across the ceiling. The Queen stood instantly. A messenger ran into the hall, panting. "Emergency transmission. The Drexer are not retreating. They've split their forces. One of the fleets is headed toward Earth." The hall fell into stunned silence. Jacob's hand clenched around his. "Glass," he turned to Solari. She didn't hesitate. She already knew what he was going to say. "We're going," she said. He nodded. Together, the Queen stepped forward. "You leave tonight. A new ship is waiting. You will carry our flag. And our message. The alliance begins now. Earth will not stand alone." Jacob looked at Solari again. She was no longer just a royal, no longer just a fighter. She was something more. And so was he. They had started as strangers from different worlds. Now they were one force. Unbreakable. They walked toward the hangar, side by side, with purpose. In their steps and fire in their blood, the galaxy had changed. And this time, the Drexer wouldn't be facing 2 empires. They'd be facing one. The new ship was unlike anything Jacob had seen. It was forged from both human and Obari technology. Sharp, clean Terran steel merged with glowing Obari crystal. The engines hummed with silent power. Its name, painted across the hull, read, Unity 1. Jacob stepped aboard first, scanning the sleek interior. His old instincts kicked in. He checked the exits, the weapon panels, and the backup systems. Everything was perfect. But it still didn't feel real until Solari entered behind him. Dressed not as a princess, but as a commander, the queen stood at the edge of the launch platform. Her face, always unreadable, now held something strange. Pride, sadness, resolve. She raised her hand as the hatch began to close. "Protect each other," she said. The ship lifted into the sky. Obari citizens lined the towers, watching and respectful. Silence. As the cruiser vanished into the clouds, Jacob felt the weight of two worlds pressing onto his shoulders. In orbit, the crew gathered in the command chamber. Human officers and Obari warriors stood side by side. Some spoke different languages, but none of them doubted the mission. General Matthews appeared on the screen. His face was older than when Jacob had last seen him. War had carved new lines into it. "We've evacuated the major cities. The Drexer fleet will reach Earth's atmosphere in less than 20 hours. Jacob nodded. "We'll be there in 10. They jumped into hyperspace, light bending around the hull. Inside the chamber, no one moved. Every soldier understood what was waiting on the other side. They would not be returning to safety. They were going to decide history. Earth came into view, blue and bright. But the stars beyond it were filled with Drexer ships, hundreds, more than ever recorded. The lid vessel pulsed with green energy, large enough to block out the moon. Unity 1 didn't hesitate. It dove straight toward the center of the enemy. "Fleet!" Alarms screamed as Drexer guns locked on. But the ship moved like no other. The blend of Terran instinct and Obari precision allowed it to weave through impossible fire. "Target their command relays," Solari ordered. Jacob nodded. "And get me close." On taking a team inside, a shuttle broke away from Unity 1. Inside were Jacob, Velsha, 2 human marines, and 1 Obari pilot. They moved fast, silent, and low. The Drexer didn't see them until it was too late. The shuttle slammed into the side of the enemy cruiser. Doors burst open, and Jacob charged forward. The Drexer inside hissed and lunged, but his rifle cleared the path. Velsha moved like lightning beside him, her blade a blur of silver. They reached the control chamber and set the charges. Jacob activated the signal. "Blow it on my mark. Wait for my voice." Meanwhile, Unity 1 blasted through the blockade. Solari stood at the center of the bridge, giving orders with perfect calm. Her voice cut through chaos. The Obari soldiers moved with purpose. The Terrans followed without question. "Jacob," she said over the comm. "What's your status?" He breathed hard. "We're surrounded, but we're ready. Detonating in 30 seconds. She paused. "Do you have an exit?" "No," he said. The line went quiet. Then came her voice again. "I'm coming to get you." Jacob didn't argue. He knew better by now. The charges exploded in the Drexer control chamber. A chain reaction tore through the ship's systems. As it buckled and groaned, the shuttle bay opened. Unity 1 appeared like a blade through smoke, firing a rescue beam into the side hatch. Solari stood in the loading bay, hand extended. Jacob ran for it, dragging 1 wounded Marine with him. Velsha covered the rear, slicing down the last enemy before diving through the door. The hatch sealed. The ship pulled away just as the Drexer vessel detonated behind them. The blast lit the sky. Over Earth like a second sun. The remaining enemy ships scattered, leaderless and broken. Cheers erupted on Earth's defense network. Civilians cried. Soldiers hugged. The Obari fleet held position above, protecting what was once considered a lost planet. For the first time, Terrans and Obari looked up at the same stars with the same hope. Back aboard Unity 1, Jacob sat beside Solari on the observation deck. Their uniforms were burned. Their hands were still trembling, but their eyes were clear. "You risked everything for me," he said quietly. She looked at him. "So did you." They didn't speak more. There was nothing left to prove, no more missions, no more tests. Just the quiet truth between them. A Terran, an Obari, once strangers. Now something far more powerful than anyone had expected. Two souls who had rewritten the future of the galaxy. Together,